Seventh graders, this is your practice test. It looks very similar to your test that you're taking on Friday. So make sure you put your name and your number up here. I am collecting it tomorrow and I am grading it for points as well as work, showing all your steps. So let's look at number 1. Use the table to determine 3 sets of ordered pairs and graph the function. Well, you can see that you have a chart. It looks just a little bit different than the charts that we've been working with, but it works the same way. So let me show you how you use this chart. So you're going to choose your point that you want to plug in for x to get your value for y. And you can put those here in this column. Okay, but if you take a look, your slope is 1/3, so you don't want to choose points like -2 and 2. You want to choose those points that are going to cancel that out. So I'm going to choose a -3, a 0, and a +3. And then I'm going to solve to see what I get. So this middle section is for you to do your work. So you can say that if you plug in -3 for your x value, you're going to get -1/3 times a -3, which is going to give you a +1. And so now the point goes here. The point you've just created is when x is -3, y is a +1. And now the next point that I'm going to choose, and the next x value that I'm going to choose is 0. So I'm going to say if I have that -3 and I multiply it times 0, I'm going to get 0. So the point that I've created is 0, 0. And now I'm going to plug in a +3. So a -1/3 times a +3 is really a -1. And so the point that I found out is that when x is 3, y is -1. And now I have to graph the function because the second part of this thing says graph the function. So I'm going to take my points and plug them in. So I have -3, 1. And -3 is my x value, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 and put a point on oh, sorry, I did it wrong. -3, 1. I have to go over 3, and then I have to go up 1. So 1, 2, 3, and up 1 is here. And my next point is 0, 0, which is here. And my third point is 3, -1. So over 3 and down 1 is here. And now I can connect my dots. And so here's my line. And this is the line of the equation y equals -1/3 x. It's really important to always label your lines. And let's just double check. We have a negative slope. Remember, the m is negative, so that -1/3 tells us our line is going down and to the right, which it does when we've graphed it. So that means we've done it correctly. Okay, let's move on to number 2. And number 2 says that determine the slope of the linear function. So they gave us 2 points. They gave us a point right here, okay, and that's the point 2, 1. And they gave us this point up here, and that's the point 0, 4. And so you can choose to do 2 things. You can choose to use your slope formula that you know, or you could choose to count rise over run. And since we know slope is rise over run, we can just say, all right, I'm going up 1, 2, 3. So I'm going up 3, and I'm going over 1, 2. And if I take a look, my line is in a negative direction. So that means my slope must be a -3/2. Now, number 3 says, determine the slope of the line that goes through the given points. So this is where we definitely need to make sure that we know how to use our slope formula. And our slope formula is the change in y over the change in the x values. Okay, and so I'm going to plug it in. So I'm going to call this my point 1 and this my point 2. And so y of my point 2 is 4 minus the y of my point 1, which is 2, all over the x in my point 2, which is the number 1, minus the x in my point 1, which is a -5. And that's equaling my slope. So I'm going to solve, and I'm going to first say that I'm adding the opposites. And so I end up with 4 plus a -2, which is a 2, and a 1 plus a 5, which is a 6, But that, of course, can be simplified to 1/3, and we always simplify. So our slope answer goes here as 1/3. All right, moving on, we have number 4. Number 4 is our old concepts. Daniel drove 330 miles from his house to Los Angeles at an average speed of 66 miles per hour. His trip home took 5.5 hours. Okay? So we want to know, was his trip home faster or was his trip home slower? So if he drove 330 miles, that's his distance at an average speed of 66 miles per hour. We could solve how many hours he drove for. So we use the trip from his house to LA. So that's his house to LA. And we use the formula D equals RT. And the distance was 330. And it's equal to the rate of 66 times some number of hours. We don't know what it is, so we want to solve. So we want to divide both sides by 66 so that we can get T alone. So T is equal to 330 divided by 66. And so you can do your long division. And I'm plugging mine into a calculator right now. So 330 divided by 66 is 5. That means it took him 5 hours to go from his house to LA. So now let's figure out what it took him to go home. Well, it says his trip home took 5.5 hours. So is his trip home faster or slower? Well, since it took him more time, it must have been slower. So I'm going to write slower. Okay, but of course, this work has to be present in order for me to give you full credit for this problem. If you just write an answer, you're just guessing. I need to see the proof. Now it says about how many miles faster or slower was his trip home. So I'm going to take the trip home, which was 5.5 hours, and I'm going to subtract the 5 hours that it took to get there, and it's a difference of 0.5, which is basically 30 minutes, half of an hour. Okay, so we would say it's about 30 minutes slower. And we would box our answers. Okay, and of course, again, I need to see the work. Okay, here's problem number 5. Jerry read a 240-page book in 10 hours. At that rate, how long will it take him to read a 384-page book? Okay, well, if we look up at our title, we're dealing with proportions. So we know we need to set up a proportion. So here's our first piece of information. 240-page book in 10 hours. So I'm going to set that up as a proportion. 240 pages in 10 hours. And I'm going to set it equal to something else. Well, the next piece of information that they gave us was a 384-page book. So I want to put that in the numerator so that my pages are both in the numerator, which leaves the how long for the denominator. And I'm going to do cross multiplication, and I'm going to say 240 times x is 240x, which is equal to 10 times 384, which is 3,840. And I'm going to divide both sides by 40 so that I can get my x alone. And so I end up with x is equal to, and you'll probably have to do some long division, so you can do your long division over here off to the side. And you have 3,840 divided by 240, which is 16. And so what does that 16 mean? It means that it will take him 16 hours to read the 384 pages. Okay, and we can box our answer. Moving on, we have problem number 6. And problem number 6 is these 4 printers. Okay, now when you solve this problem, I want to be able to see your work. I want to know which work goes with it, which problem. So I want you to try to work across your page. Like if you drew lines and kept these guys in their own columns, you could do all your work within the columns. And if you can't do that, then you should be making columns this way and doing all of your work for each of your printers in the columns. Okay? And that way then all of your work is together. So I'm going to do my express print here. An express print is 65 pages in 1 minute. Okay? And my speedy print is 120 pages in 2 minutes. And my jet printer is 1 page in 1 second. And my fast print is 2 pages in 4 seconds. Okay, so I need to compare these guys, but in order to compare them, they have to have common denominators. Now, just making them all 1 is not going to work. They have to all be seconds, or they have to all be minutes. So I'm going to take everything to seconds. So I'm going to start with the easy guy. This guy's done. He's already 1 page per second. So let's get this guy. In order for this to be a 1 second on the bottom, I would have to divide the bottom by 4. And if I divide the bottom by 4, I divide the top by 4. And 2 divided by 4 is a half. Okay, well, is a half bigger, faster, or slower than 1? Do you want 1 page per second, or do you want a half page per second? Well, you would want the 1. So this guy already is slower, so we're going to take him out of the loop. Now this guy is in minutes, and he has to become seconds. So 2 minutes is really 120 seconds. And so it's 120 pages per second, or per 120 seconds. Well, 120 pages in 120 seconds, we need it to be in 1 second. So to get 120 down to 1, we have to divide by 120. So divide the denominator and the numerator, and you get 1 in 1 second. Well, now these guys are tied. They're the same rate. So now we have to go over and do our express print. 65 pages in 1 minute is the same thing as 65 pages in 60 seconds. But I can't use 60 seconds. I have to take the 60 seconds down to 1 second. Okay, and so I need to do the long division. 65 divided by 60. This is going to go in 1 time, and I'm going to get a little more than a page. So 60 goes into 500 something like 8 times. So you have a little more than 1 page per second. So more than 1 page per second makes Express Printer the winner. He's printing more than 1 page per second, where this guy is only printing 1 page per second, and this guy is only printing 1 page per second. So you would write Express Printer is the fastest. And then you need to make sure that I can see your work for each of the printer companies that you did, and I can follow your steps for each of the printer companies. That's the way that you get full credit. Okay, 7th graders, this should be the last problem for you for today. So I want you to make sure that you bring all of your work and all of your steps, and I'm going to give you a grade on it. See you tomorrow.